This is Max Stroke. I just want to talk to you about uh, an app logger in a way, automatic logging. I've done this. It's really to do with sort of capturing time for doing timesheets and things like this. I did a original. Well, I found somebody had a really simple little tool which you just have a hotkey and it popped up a box and a GUI and you can actually add time to it and it go and record it on a sheet. And I found that was absolutely brilliant for me as I was jumping between projects and doing a whole lot of different things. The only problem was it was retrospective, and I also didn't think I was actually capturing all of the work that I was actually doing. So I ended up taking a simple logger that they had, that chap named Joy, and I did things like being able to put your own project codes and things into that, and then that wrote out to a CSV, and also you could also make your own hotkeys as to how you were going to activate it, and you could also go back and post edit the actual text file later if you suddenly thought, oh, I actually want to add an extra bit of a description into one of the tasks that I was actually doing. So I was very pleased with what that actually achieved at the end of the day, and it's if you I'll put a link to the video and you can actually go into the thing and download the script if you want to use it. But it is handy, and I do use it when I'm working on some projects. But I always have this feeling that I'm sort of missing out on time. I go off and I do an email and I forgot to actually, and writing an email, I might end up chewing up a bit of time doing that, and I don't get it. So I saw this Haldon, and he has these one-day builds, and on this one he did an automatic tracking using Python. Now the way that he did that was that he writes it to a JSON file, and also he pre-filters. So as he's going into different tasks, he's only recording the ones that he wants. So if he's going onto the web browser, if he's going into Stack Overflow, then he'll record that. If he's using code, VS Code, he's recording that. So each instance sees that he's using that throughout the day, he's recording those sorts of things. And if he's using Terminal, or if he's using different programs that are coming through. So he's got all of these different methods that he's doing, and he wrote his code and he's got it into here, but when I tried running it, I couldn't get some of my libraries to load, so it didn't work for me. But I suddenly thought, well, what he's doing there, I can actually do that in AutoHotKey, and I've got a whole load of AutoHotKey scripts that I run in the background, and I find them really useful. So I found this on the thing, find where you waste your time on Windows with AutoHotKey, and this is by Odysseus Kouraphalos, I think. So I think it's a Greek, lovely name. And I really like the way that he writes his articles. There's a couple of other ones. I've got another thing that I took from him, and to start off with. What I like is that he does it. He starts off as a very small baby steps, and he breaks down each part that he's doing, and he goes through the code itself. But right at the very end, he actually just has the full script. So you can actually just grab the script, fire it off, and do it. So that's where I started off. So I want to initially just talk through this script at this point in time, just so that we know what's happening. So you can actually say the duration that it's doing. So he's got this app logging rate at 10 seconds. So every 10 seconds, it goes through and just sees what the active window is. So it goes through this loop. So every 10 seconds, it goes through the loop, and it says it's got the sleep time there, which is the 1,000, and then so it's in that loop continuously all the time, and it just sleeps for 10 seconds, and then it looks again, and it says if the active window, so this is an active window, if I go and click on here, that's another active window. If I go into code, that's another active window. So every time I switch a window or switch a tab or something, that's a new active window. So every time, if the active window is not the same as the last active window, in other words the one that I was on just before, then write a new line. So first of all, it says get the time and format it as hours, minutes, second. Go and get the date and format it as years, months and days, because I'm going to use that to name my file. So therefore I've got a daily file that's collecting all of that. Now he happens to hold it in a markdown file, and he's done a little bit of string replacement here, which I don't think is necessarily myself. Well, I've taken it out because I don't want to use it. And then he puts the time that he's got the log time in there, and then he gets the the window title, and he puts that in there, and then he creates some new lines, and then he just appends it to the log file, and that's it. So that's quite a simple little script, and so this is what he ends up getting through here. So he ends up with the start time, and then whatever the active Windows is, so obviously this must be his Explorer or something like that, he's saying he's an Explorer. Then when he's in a notepad, he's saying what file he's using, so that's actually got the title. And so of all of these, now this is just a text file, well in fact it's a markdown file, but it's got all of this. You suddenly think, well that's not usable. And so I said, no, I'm just going to run a CSV. And then I looked down here and he said, well actually you can do a CSV to actually manipulate this data later. So you suddenly think, well that's quite handy to actually use as a timesheet. So the first thing that I actually did was you get certain things for free inside AutoHotKeys. Now inside AutoHotKeys you've got things like the PID, the AutoHotKey ID, you've got the Win class. So if we actually just come out and use the WinSpy on here, you've got the title which is at the top here. So this says Visual Studio Code, AutoHotKey working, so that's the directory I'm working in, and then it's got the name of the file. So that's what I've got there, and I've got it straight away. So I can actually just say, go and get me the Win title of the active window, so you can get that, and then you can get the class. Now this class is good and it's bad. There's a lot of things that have the same class, and I'll discuss that in a minute. Then you can get this one here. Now this is a sort of the identifier of this is AutoHotKey.exe that's running code.exe. So normally if you want to find out the actual AutoHotKey code, you can use this descriptor here, AutoHotKey_exe, and then code or Firefox or Word or Excel.exe, and it'll return, if you use WinGet, and it'll return the ID of that one. And then you've got the PID. Now the PID is different again. It's the process ID. So let's just look and see what a process ID is. So if we've actually got Task Manager, so if you just go Control-Alt-Del and just go Task Manager, this is what you'll get up here. Now instead of actually at the process at the button, I just drop this down. Ah, there we go. Oops, no, not both down. Oh, I closed them both. Okay then, Control-Alt-Del, Control-Alt-Del, get on there you. We get Task Manager through here. We normally see the processes at the beginning and see what we've got running, and something's playing up, but we can go into the details and we can see what processes we got. Now I'm just going to activate a notepad. Now if we go down to notepad and let's just get to N. So here's the notepad one that we got, and its PID, so its process ID is 14168. Now if I close that and then I open it again and we go to notepad, you see now it's changed its process ID to 25116, and if I close that again and I open it again, it'll end up with another process ID. So with all the programs, if you shut your computer down and you restart your computer, every time everything comes up again, it's going to have a different PID, it's going to have a different AutoHotKey thing. Now the window class will stay the same, but there's an issue with the window class, and here's a demonstration of that. So if we just get the window ID, so if I go into Visual Studio Code, it says my window class is called Chrome_widget_win_1. Now if I go into Obsidian and I click into this, the class is exactly the same. So when we start getting all these free sampling stuff from AutoHotKeys, and we go, whoops, when we go into one of our processes here, we see we can get the address, and the address bar has all of that information. So it's saying what program, what file we're in, what program, what folder we're in, and what program we're in, and then we've got the class. I've asked for it to write the class, and then I've asked for the AutoHotKey ID, and I've also asked for the PID. So I've got all of those things there, and then we got the time. So this is where I was suddenly thinking, well, okay, then I've gathered all of that stuff in. Now what can I do with that? So one of the first things that we are going to do, if we go back and look at what the difference between the two things that happen here. This one here just gives a start time. So if you want to work out how many minutes or seconds you've worked between all of these, you've got to subtract that from that and do all of that. And so you've got to subtract, if you've been working on this one for 3 hours or something, then you've got to subtract so many hours from this and this and that and the other, and do a whole lot of different maths based on seconds, minutes and things. This one here, he does that calculation all the way through. So he says, this is the start time, this is the end time, you've had so many hours, so many minutes and so many seconds. So therefore, every time he comes through as another instance of running these programs, he can gather them. Now what he's done here is he's pre-processed. So as he's getting the information, he's only getting the information that he wants. So if he's working in code, or if he's working in Stack Overflow, or if he's working in the terminal. Now if he's on YouTube, he'll suddenly say, no, that YouTube's just for my fun stuff, so anything to do with YouTube, don't show me. Only show me every instance that I actually am working in code. And then I can actually add all of those up and actually give a graph of where I'm doing with those sorts of things. And I think his second one is to do a flutter app for something like that. So that's useful to actually get the duration. So in fact, that's what you want. You don't actually care about the start time and the end time. What you want is the duration. Now I do find in AutoHotKey, doing string manipulation, doing adding and subtracting and things like that in AutoHotKey can be a bit of a nuisance. With the plus equals and all of that coming through there. Once you've got it and it's working, it's fantastic, but I find I've usually got a fiddle of factor to do it. So what I ended up doing was I ended up doing UTC, so that's universal time, so it's the same as epoch time, so it's basically the number of seconds from the 1st of January 1970. So if I look at the date here, which is the 3rd of the 2nd 2023, at 1604, 404.01, that is equivalent to that number of seconds. So what I can do is I can get the previous end, and I can put that as the end, or sorry, start and an end through there, and I can subtract one from the other to see how many seconds that particular I was on a particular screen before I switched over to another one. So now I've got duration. So that's great. So I can get the duration, and although it's in seconds, I can actually convert it, and I actually did the exercise of converting it into hours and minutes and stuff like that through there. So as part of the code, I did that exercise into here, although I don't want to use it at this point. And this is how you use it, and there's a little bit of code to actually do that. So that took me a little bit of a time to do. So the thing that we're trying to do is to gather some stuff. Another thing which I noticed when I was looking at Halden's one, when we were looking at his one, is that he's going into his browser and he's getting the name of the website, so he's having to get the URL. Now what we're getting automatically from the AutoHotKey one is that we're getting the title. So what we're getting here is, where's the thing, we're getting Mozilla Firefox, you're on YouTube, and this was the video that you were watching, and this is the other thing that you were doing through there. So those ones there are giving me that, but they aren't giving me the URL. So what he was doing in his was he was stripping this off. So he was taking the HTTP, so he's getting the URL, taking the HTTPS : 2/ and the www dot, and he was just coming back with YouTube. So he could then say, if I was doing something on YouTube, we'll say, I don't want that, that's not going on my timesheet. But if I was doing something on Stack Overflow, I was doing some research, I want that on my timesheet. So he was using that as a method of doing. So I wanted to capture that only if I was in a browser, because obviously if I'm not in a browser, I can't grab that information. So how did I do that? That was another bit of a nuisance one, so going through there, and that caused another little bit of an issue coming through with the stuff. So when I started to look at what I wanted to do, I suddenly thought, well, yeah, I do want something to do with time management, but suddenly I've got all of this data, so anything I do on the computer, I can, if I want, I can log it to a file. So on one thing that I'm doing is I'm doing a daily log that I'm just collecting stuff. Now I can choose to pre-filter it and suddenly saying, well, only write to file if it is in code, or if I'm in a particular program for Word or this or that and the other. And if I'm on a website, then only if I'm on these websites, these other ones don't ignore. So I can do a pre-processing, but I suddenly thought, again, the nice thing which I liked about the second article is find where you waste your time. So I thought, well, actually, this is quite good. So I can get some raw data. I'm really quite interested in Python and data analytics. So I thought, well, this is a good way to explore how much time I actually waste on a lot of things. So I thought, well, this is a handy tool to use as well to actually start looking at two separate things. So I don't want to do pre-processing at this point in time. Suddenly only taking information that I want to do post-processing. So first of all, I actually just want to, in the background, just collect everything. And then once I've collected everything, I suddenly thought, well, from what I'm doing, I want to gather the data and then I want to analyze the data so that I can sort of formulate what I want to do with it. Do I want to do something which might be habit changing, which suddenly saying, look how much time you've wasted on these sites today, or this is when you make this behavior of doing this, and do I want to modify that, or is that acceptable? And some things are, I'm quite acceptable. I enjoy going and looking onto new sites and things like that, and as long as it's not being charged against the thing, then I don't have any issue with it at all. And then there's a thing of some of the things that came up. So first of all, the issues that came up was I suddenly think, well, at this point in time, I just want to do some processing, and I suddenly thought I want to do this in Python because in AutoHotKey there are challenges and stuff like that. And getting the data gathering, that's one exercise through there, and I can do pre-processing and suddenly saying, well, I only record things when I'm working in these programs, and it just writes those to files. For the other ones it just ignores. And the second thing that you can actually do is that you can get all of the information, and then I wanted to do a different project inside Python, which was really analyze a lot of that data and just see what I've got, and then also start looking at how to split it all up into different things. And another one in Python, as I'm playing with Python, is that I want to see if I could actually do a compile, maybe with the Python GUIs, which is Tkinter or whatever it is, to do a Python GUI instead of an AutoHotKey. So I suddenly thought, well, that's two different learning processes that I'm interested in. So at the end of the day, I may not have an ultimate time thing through there. And also I might develop that later. So at this point in time, I'm sort of exploring the data as to what to do, but there's a few issues that sort of start kicking up. So I feel as if I've got the time and the duration, I've got that. So later on, and then I need to be able to transfer that stuff through so that it can be post-processed. So that's where I'm looking at doing things at this point in time. Now at the end of the day, I might suddenly say, well, all that post-processing and all that messing around, not worth the trouble. I'm just going to go to a pre-processed ones, filter out all the things that I don't want to go through, and then do that. So this is something that I've been juggling with, which is sort of like black hat and white hat, or good information that I want to record to do with something that I can actually allocate to a timesheet, and bad things which I can't record. Like if I'm going onto a news site and just checking on the news or the weather, that's just personal information. Or the other one is if I'm going on and looking at my logging on for my bank account, and so I don't want to give what bank I'm with or all this other information out there. So I want to hide that and conceal that sort of thing. So I've got this idea of if I'm doing something that I don't want to either log, I can either log that time, but you log it as NOYB, none of your business. So you could log it as to that, or just leave it blank, only log the good stuff that you actually want. So again, there's the white hat. One of the ways that you could do that is maybe you have two ini files and it goes through and compares, or it has, I think you can get a whole load of arrays and stuff. So check through the arrays. If it's not in those arrays, then if it's not in the black array, then put it in. If it's not in the white array, you can have two, and then you can actually have a third. So you can have things of, you've done these extra ones. Do you want to make them black or do you want to make them white? Do you want to register them or not? So that you can, over time, it's sort of, it's doing a bit of learning, and you can develop enough comprehensive things that it's capturing nearly all the stuff that you're doing. So as I said, there is a way that I can go back and travel that and do pre-processing. At this point in time, I actually want to do the post-processing. So the second one that was a big issue for me and I still have got something here is if you walk away from your computer and your computer's still active, like you suddenly wander into a meeting and the meeting's about something else, administration or something. So it's not actually on the very program on the thing that you've got active on your screen at that point in time. What happens then? So I actually did a bit of a think about that, and I ended up with a couple of alternatives of what you're doing. So one of the things that I've got is I'm just pressing the right Alt key now, and you see this tiny tracker comes up, and it says how many hours I've been working on this particular computer today, which is 3 hours 46. Now what this does is after 3 minutes, if there's no activity on the keyboard, it just pauses. And as soon as you start typing or you start moving your mouse again, it carries on ticking over and doing the clock. So it's basically a clock, and the clock just pauses if you stop doing the keyboard, and then it starts again after a certain duration. So you could do that, and that would just work in the background and you're not really aware that it's happening. So that's one way, and you're suddenly thinking, well, you could actually be sitting at the computer and you could be watching a training video on YouTube or something, in which case, maybe you're watching it for 10-15 minutes and you're not touching everything. Or maybe you're actually watching a film, like I work from home, so in the evenings I might watch a film, in which case I'm not touching the computer for a long bit of time, so suddenly somebody says you're not doing anything at all. So it's sort of what you do with that one there. Now there's a couple of ones I actually had an idea of that. One of them was to actually have your mobile phone synced in with Bluetooth, such that when you walked away and you went off to a meeting, you'd take your phone with you, in which case it would disconnect, and so therefore you can suddenly say, no, I'm not active anymore, so I can put it on sleep. You can actually just put a duration on there and just suddenly saying, if nothing happens within 10 minutes, then do that. Another one I was thinking of is maybe use something with your webcam, except a lot of times I actually have my webcams covered. So there's all of these, and in the end I suddenly thought the best, simplest way in some way. The another one was a screensaver. So all you do is if you're not active for 10 minutes or something, your screensaver comes on. I think a lot of people in their offices have that. I tend not to use screensavers. I tend to either manually turn the screen off, and so I have to log back in again, in which case it just closes, it just pauses, the program just pauses at that point in time and there's nothing recorded. But if you don't, if you leave your screen going, then what you do with that? So there's something, a question I haven't actually really dealt with it. I think at the end of the day, I think what I'd do is I'd have a pop-up in the corner, just in case you're watching a film or something like that and you don't want to touch anything on the screen, and it just pops up in the corner. It has a, and if you don't react to that pop-up within a certain minute, it then pauses the program until you reactivate it again. But it's in a discrete place that it's not actually interfering with if you're watching a video or a film or something like that. So I think my conclusion is there, and so it's a little reminder. So if you're away from the desk, it's popped up, it's and your screen's still active, and then after a minute after things, so you can set it for 5 minutes or 10 minutes or something like that. But sometimes you might actually be working next to it, and you might have printed out a whole lot of things and working through prints, or you've got some sketches that you're working out of detail and stuff like that. So you could be there working at the computer, still working on the project, but because you're actually doing something manually beside the computer and you're not actually touching the keyboard or the mouse, then it does that. So that was a question that I feel as if I need to nail at one point in time. So at this point in time, I've started to add extra things. So if we look at the scripts that we've got at this point in time, you'll see if I go from the very early ones, they basically just got the time in seconds, UTC times, and the titles, and then I've added some of these other things on at the beginning, and I've still got the time. And again, just if they're in the file and they're written, you can always clean them out later, and you can make the files tidy. So that's what I started off with, and then I started to switch things around. Like at this point in time, I've now put the duration at the beginning. So if I come in and read that file, I can actually just grab from the first column, get that information and pull it back out again. Whether I still need these ones through here, the times and the durations and things, I can always take out again later. The other thing that I've started to do through here now, this is something I do want to talk about. To get the URL inside inside of the browser. So if I'm inside here and I want to get this, I want this address bar through there. Now one way you can actually do this is to go F6, and if you hit F6, that'll get you that inside of Firefox, and then you can go Control Copy, and then you can clipboard paste that URL into your actual script further down. The other one that you can use is Alt D. Now I've got Alt D, but what it does is it pops up this whole thing here, which is really irritating, and you've got to go and click off to actually get back out of it again. So the Alt D was what I had, and I just found it quite irritating in a way. So in the end, I actually found this gentleman here called ATM Bueno, and he wrote one that does it on multiples. So this one works on Opera, it works on Google Chrome, Firefox, Internet Explorer, all of these other ones through here. And so I suddenly thought, well, my hotkey there for the F6 or the Alt D was a sort of a patchwork. It was something that worked, and so I got the data into the file of where I actually wanted it, but it wasn't an elegant solution. So in the end today, in fact this morning, I went through and I added where is that script through there? So the browser address bar. So this is the one that he's written, and he's got using a couple of DLL classes, and he's got some classes that he's put down at the bottom. So I've just added that into mine. So now the script is a bit more usable for other people who use Chrome rather than Firefox and things like that. He'll just grab any of these applications as long as it's the modern browser ones. So I've now adapted that into the program at this point in time. The other thing that I've done is as well, so what happened when I did this first time round, I actually had, it was either Firefox, in which case I added the URL at the end, otherwise for every other program I didn't. So if we look at some of the earlier files, you'll see that all of them end up, if you just look at these colors, so we've got the title, then we've got the class, the AutoHotKey ID, and then we've got the PID through there, and then it stops. Later on, I added in the URL through here, but I didn't add it into the other one. So when I actually came into doing the second part, so after actually just getting a whole load of data, I suddenly thought, right, now I can do the second part of the process, which is actually seeing if I can get it into a Panda data frame inside of Python. What happened is it just kept on erroring out, because some of the lines in the code were 6 columns long and some of them were 7 columns long. So I had to add another comma into all of the ones where I didn't have the URL, and then I just get an NIN coming back at the end through here. So I can now open that up as a CSV. The other thing that I haven't got at the very beginning here, and that data structure I can most probably add later, is I don't have headers. So at this point in time, it's just made the first one headers, so I should actually put in there no header. As I've come in and I'm reading that in my pandas. But I've got that such that I've now got the information in, so I can suddenly say, well, okay, then I've now, whatever I'm logging, I can now actually bring and use in I can upload that CSV file into Python pandas into a data frame, such that I can start manipulating. I can start giving it headers. I can start doing a whole load of other things on top of it. I can either add headers back inside the AutoHotKey script if I want through there. But then again, I'm changing columns quite quickly, so it's not critical that I do at this point in time. Really, all I want to do is to start. The next thing is to start suddenly saying, well, okay, then as long as I've got an interface link between the two programs, I'm comfortable with what's actually been logging, so I can actually just sit on that and just daily let this thing log away. So whether I do some pre-processing inside of my main program here, inside the logger, which actually says, okay, then if I'm in Firefox, if it's going into my bank account or my bank website, just don't show it, don't write it down at all. So I can actually say, so I might have to find some way of getting that URL, getting it to analyze that URL. That's one way of doing it. But I'm not bothering with that at this point in time, but I do know that there might be sensitive stuff that you do not want in a file. And so we've got to look at that later on. So as you're going through, you're suddenly thinking, well, I can kind of leave it simple and I can just do it in a very, very crude way, or I can manage it later. And then when I've suddenly thought, well, you know, the next thing that you can actually do, because I'm getting a daily log, I can actually just take each of those days and just pre-process them and suddenly saying, okay, then I've done so much time in code, I've done so much time in all of these different programs through into there, and then I can actually just say, but that will actually just say, that's how much time you spent active. As to where you allocate it, especially if you're running across 2 or 3 different projects, how do you suddenly say, I'm working, you know, like I'm doing one project which is a bit of a website, and I'm doing another one which is a bit of Python analytics, and I'm doing a third one which is an AutoHotKey script for somebody, you know, for a bar counter code thing or something like that. How do you differentiate between those? And one of the ways that I was actually thinking that I could do it was inside the titles or something like that, the file names. If I'm working in a particular project, I actually just have a prefix or a suffix. A prefix is easier to grab than a suffix onto all of my file names, such that it's identifying like an O underscore or a 1 underscore or an 001 underscore or something. I'll give it a code for the main script file or something that you're actually doing, or the main projects, so that you can clearly pick up that those ones are the main identifiers, and you can suddenly say, well, look, I spent that much time coding, but then I've got this for the overall day. I spent this much time on web browser, as in doing productive web browsing. So these are useful sites that I've been working on, that I can then suddenly say, well, I did 3 hours on that, 2 hours on that, another 2 hours on that, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then I've got all of this website stuff that I've been doing, and then you can suddenly saying, well, okay, then I can allocate the time and split it just by ratios of whichever I've done. So you could, at some point in time, when I was doing this particular one, you have to make a judgment call as to which project you're doing in, and then you have to guess what time you're doing. On the other one that we're doing, back in the background, we're actually passively logging all of this time. Then hopefully we're going to be able to whitelist the information and get all of the time that we were doing something productive with things, that we can suddenly say, well, those pertain to that sort of thing. And we can then say, right, we've got a bigger duration, because this other one we're sort of saying, oh, I did about half an hour, when in fact you did 3/4 of an hour. And if you kept on underestimating, you could suddenly maybe gather another couple of hours along the day. Because I find I sort of tend to work to a project rather to a fixed time period on a lot of things. So you can gather more time, but at some point in time you're going to have to do some processing or make a decision on where you're going to allocate that time onto which particular project. So you need some project identifiers further on. That's what I'm actually finding with the information that I'm getting through here. Like web browsing is a bit general, so you don't want that, but on some of the other ones you need some way of actually being able to passively identify which project you're working on. So the only one that I can actually pick up at this point in time is on your file names. These are the actual file names, but this is the main one that I'm working on. So I'm working on this screenlogger.AutoHotKey. So in some ways there's an indication there. I'm working in AutoHotKey, so that's my AutoHotKey project. So it's not my HTML files or my CSS or my JS files that I'm working on. So so maybe that's another way to differentiate between things. But to a certain extent, if you've got a signature, or maybe you actually just look at the file extensions of when you're actually, but that's fine for something like code where you're actually working in different file types, so you can actually sort of work that out. For if I'm working on a design project or something like that, like a lot of the times actually with the design projects, you've usually got a project code in the file name itself. So that could be an indicator of which project, so you can work out, you know, if I'm doing a BIM model or something like that, as to which one's there. But I haven't been able to, I think I'm going to have to be doing some string manipulation to actually get that out of some of the files, or being able to do those sorts of things. But I've got a feeling that I may, somewhere along the line, you're going to have to add some extra information in, because what you're going to be able to do is, at the end of the day, you're going to get these big chunks of information, and you're only going to be able to split it down to a certain level. Now, what you could do is you could actually just go in daily and then split that file into different sub-files, and suddenly saying, well, during that time, during that hour and a half, or that time there, I was working on that project, and during that time I was working on that project over there, and during that time. So you could split it down and process 3 separate files to give you, you know, those times as to where you are on those. But then there's a bit of effort required in that. So I think, you know, this is just purely passive. So what this is allowing you to do is to say the overall time that you were spending on work tasks. So that's what we're trying to capture, because you're not getting that. And I've got a real feeling that I've been underestimating my time quite a lot when I've been doing it this method. So I think this other method will give me that. So, but there is a cost associated with that, is that you may actually have to do a bit more filtering. It would be nice if you could do some pre-processing inside a script, and I'm hoping to be able to get an executable Python file that you can just grab a file and it will come spit it out at the end, you know, with certain things jumped up, and then you can actually just do a little bit of manual manipulation and sort of thing. I'll give half an hour to that project for the website stuff that I was doing there, and I'll give a quarter of an hour to there, you know. But at some point in time, there's a bit of effort that you've got to actually do for these things. So I think it's a project for me worth pursuing from the point of view of it will be able to identify the actual real time that I've been spending on stuff. As long as I can get that, how do I stop, how do I do the pause? And that, I think, is most probably the next thing that I'll need to focus on. Plus also the fact that I'm now excited such that I can get my data into a Python data frame, to start playing with that and start stripping it down, as to start clustering it and doing some things to see how many minutes throughout the things. But it's only the last day that I've done that. So a lot of tweaking so far, and it's still very messy, and it's still early days as to where the relevance actually lies. But I'm quite pleased, because you know, with things like Clockify, when I was actually looking at my time clock and all of that, and I was looking at a whole load of other examples, ones that are done online, ones that are done here, ones that are done there, ones that are, you know, of things. They all need you to make a conscious effort to go and press a button or do a pause or do something, and I'm always forgetting. My mind's somewhere else and I forget to do that. So you know, if you've got something that's passively just collecting all the time, you can then take that resource and use it as you will. You know, suddenly saying, well, you know, as long as I've done my 8 hours or whatever you actually need inside there, I don't really care, you know. And but as I said, the other one that I'm quite interested in is to actually look at my behaviour. What other rubbish am I actually spending my time? And to a certain extent, you're doing certain things unconsciously, and so being able to identify that is quite a useful thing to have. So I hope that's been of interest to you. At the moment, everything's quite scrappy, so this is really just an overall thing of where this project is going, and I think it is important because as I'm going through, more questions are being raised, and I'm then finding more challenges as to how to do things. And as I said, I'm doing it in a rather sloppy way, is that I'm doing the AutoHotKey and I'm doing Python because I want to do a bit more learning inside Python. But for a simple thing like this data logger thing, I find AutoHotKey is great. You know, it's the bee's knees for things like that. So And I'm still using version 1 at this point in time. I most probably end up having to go to version 2 at some point in time, but this is why I'm comfortable at this point in time. My main focus of this is now to get some Python stuff getting on and doing some stuff inside there. So the AutoHotKey script is not my major priority, but it most probably will come back again another time. So thank you very much for watching. If you found this useful, please give a thumbs up. If not, op on your heart.